got lit from this holy fire from God. Keep that in mind. I mean, how can we, I don't know if we can quite even put it in anything we can comprehend.
Eighth graders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, for those of us.
Over the ark. There have been movies that have shown that.
That's
the way that fire came down.
Yeah,
and it did all
right.
that.
And it lit, the fire itself, lit everything up and so forth. The idea that I think we came across it a few weeks ago was that light was then that was God's own light from heaven, and their job was to keep it from ever going out. They were supposed to always feed it and never let it go out. The eternal flame. So keep that in mind before we get to the next passage, because we're going to need. I think we'll understand the next passage a whole lot better when we get that. But while we're waiting on that, let's go to page 440 now, First Fruits of Zion, and let's go ahead and start with Deanna. You have to read the scripture now. Go right into the passage.
This first worship service demonstrates several principles that are applicable to any worship service. First, we know that the priesthood and the children of Israel were not gathered for the purpose of receiving anything or being entertained. Instead, they were gathered to bring gifts to God and to worship Him in the manner He had prescribed. Nevertheless, they did receive. They received blessings from Moses and Aaron, and most significantly, they had the privilege of a close encounter with God.
Let's have you pick it up. Who's down there? Christina, do we need another chair?
I'm actually really comfortable here.
Okay.
This is really comfortable. Okay. Nowadays, when people attend worship services, they usually do so for the entertainment value of the music or the sermon. They expect to be provided with a spiritual experience or intellectual stimulation. When we gather together, we should do so for God's sake, not for our own. We should be desiring to bestow our gifts upon Him and to serve Him according to the careful instructions He has provided. The people in attendance should be concerned with blessing God. Like Aaron and Moses in the tabernacle, the leadership should be concerned with blessing the people. Most importantly, should anticipate a close encounter with God. When we gather in His houses of worship on His appointed times, it is reasonable to expect that He will be present in some manner and impact our lives.
I thought that was such a good explanation of how, I'm sure there have been times when I've walked in. I remember my kids saying to me, "We've heard all his sermons already." Well, apparently there's something you didn't get out of it because God brought it back around. So I'm listening again. Let's go ahead to the next paragraph, Marina. On the other hand,
the fire of the Lord did not blaze forth in that manner on a daily basis. The priests continued to serve and bring the offerings every day after that first miraculous worship service. They kept the divine fire alive by feeding the flames of the altar, but the amazing glory of the Lord did not blaze out again.
good. Thank you, Janice.
There were probably some Israelites who felt as if something was amiss. Why has this tabernacle become so spiritually dry?
Keep in mind, the author is suggesting that after, a year and a half of this, that without the blazing fire of God coming, that the blazing fire that came is just being maintained now. And so every morning they bring the fire in, they clean out the ashes. Every night they do it, and the next morning they do it, on and on, on and on and on. So a year and a half later, the author is suggesting that people might say, why has this become so spiritually dry? Keep going, Marina. Janice.
They might have wondered, perhaps they were looking for other tabernacles where God's Spirit was really moving. Some people are always looking for spiritual fire. They are in constant pursuit of emotional highs and pneumatic dazzlement. They judge the quality of worship service as the serenity of other worshipers by means of their own internal emotional barometer. And they equate the mundane and routine with spiritual lifelessness.
Good. Let's go to the next paragraph and have you pick it up, Sharon.
Okay. Other people are more like the priests. They may have had experiences with spiritual fire, but they do not live their lives in pursuit of experiences. Instead of demanding fresh fire from heaven every week, they are diligently keeping the spiritual flame alive. Excuse me, as they go through the seemingly mundane routines of serving the Almighty according to His instructions. Sometimes there is a fresh fire, but the mature man of faith serves steadfastly in all seasons.
We'll skip the next paragraph, Marla, and have you take it up with the divine fire.
The divine fire did not appear again from time to time at the announcement of the birth of Samson in Judges 13, when Solomon dedicated the first temple in 2 Chronicles 7, and when Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18. The divine fire signified that both the sacrifice and the sacrificer had found favor in God's eyes. In Acts 2, the flames of God's glory appeared among the believers, signifying the bestowal of the Holy Spirit upon them. It happened during the festival of Pentecost, while the people of Israel were worshiping at the temple and offering the prescribed festival sacrifices. We are still keeping that Pentecost flame alive today.
That's cool. Very good, and I do think that's the last of the first fruits material that I have, so you can set that book aside.
We're not going to look at it at all? No.
Not first fruits, I've got so much other stuff. Let's go to Leviticus, back into the scripture itself, Leviticus 10, 1 and 2. Now notice that the last verse here of chapter 9 is the fire comes down, okay? Notice that, remember that. Now, remember that in the original, there's no numbers. So we're going right from reading, in 9:24, reading about fire coming forth. And the very next thing we read, Rosa, read 10,
The death.
1 and 2. Don't read that part, just
No.
read 1 and 2.
Scriptures.
Oh, here we go. The sons of Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan. They put fire in them and placed incense upon it. And they brought before Hashem an alien fire that he had commanded them.
That he had not.
That he had not commanded them.
Yeah.
A fire came forth from before Hashem and consumed them. And they died before Hashem.
Good. Let's stop right there. That's a pretty dramatic thing to happen in the middle of church, isn't it? Let's go down on 592 in the notes now and see if we can make sense of this. Let's see, that was just the verse of scriptures, wasn't it? Rosie, keep reading down under number 10 on 1-7, the death.
1-7 of death, okay. Just when the joy of the inauguration ritual had reached its peak, tragedy struck. Aaron's two oldest sons, men whom Moses described as the most outstanding sons of the nation, performed an unauthorized service and lost their lives. The behavior of Moses and Aaron in the face of this grievous loss gave a further testimony to their own greatness and brought about a new and greater sanctification of God's name.
Chris?
The sages and the commentators offer a wide range of interpretations regarding the actual deed of Nahab and Abihu, why they did it, and why it caused their death. Very briefly, we offer the major opinions of the primary commentators and perspective on the underlying flaw that caused Nahab and Abihu to err.
And before we get into that, I want to remind you of the story from 1 Samuel, I believe it is, where, maybe it's 2 Samuel, where they're trying to transport the ark on the wagon and it starts to tip and somebody reaches out their hand to stabilize it and they're gone like that. And
Because there was a certain way they were supposed to carry it.
well, we know what they did wrong, and I think we'll see what they did wrong here. But the question that, if we're honest with ourselves, has to come to mind is, do these mistakes and oversights deserve that kind of punishment? And I think most of us would find it hard to, I mean, if God's wrath and if God's margin for error is so narrow, oh my gosh, none of us can stand at all. So I think we have to look a little bit deeper. Or maybe deeper isn't the right word, but maybe just sort of take off those glasses and put on a different pair of glasses and just look at it with a different pair of eyes. What's the possibility, and we'll get into where they went wrong, because they clearly did go wrong, but what's the possibility that this energy force that caused this fire to come out of heaven into the Holy of Holies and come out, and God knew what he was going to do. He was going to light all of the stuff that needed to be lit. He wasn't relying on man to light all of it. And this energy force, if we can think of it as lightning, this lightning, you step in front of a bolt of lightning, and it doesn't make any difference how good you've been. You know, it doesn't make any difference how righteous you are. You step in front of a bolt of lightning, you're going to get fried. That's the nature of the lightning. And I think that's what we're looking at. I think we're looking at that God, it's not like he hadn't warned them, you don't touch this, you stay back from it, you carry the ark and the poles, because it too had this force field, excuse me, that seemed to be so intense that it just can't be handled like other things of this world. And so it seems to me like that's what we're talking about here. And we'll see some other indications of it that kind of would cause us to wonder. But keep in mind that at no point does God ever say anything critical of Nadab and Abihu. It doesn't. It's not like, let that teach you not to do. It's not like you don't get any lesson out of this. Now, what the rabbis, and especially the more mystical, I'm trying to remember if I heard it from Kabbalists that were talking about it, or if it was just other Orthodox Jews. This begins, and I see something in it they didn't see. They were talking about the righteous of a generation, the death of the righteous acting as an atonement for the people. And some people were saying that that's not in Judaism, and then other people were saying, oh yeah, it is, and they were citing all kinds of cases where the righteous of a generation can atone for the people. That the Jews believed in a measure for measure. That it makes sense to you? That if you're, whatever bad things you've done, you'll suffer to that extent. But then, if you have people who are so righteous, and we're not talking the Christian evangelical sense of perfect righteousness that earns heaven. We're not talking about that. We're just talking about good people who spend their life serving others, and they're righteous in that Jewish sense, not righteous in that perfect before the throne of heaven sense of evangelicals. Okay, if that righteous person suffers, what about that? Is he suffering from some sin? And Job's friends, remember Job's friends came and told him, yeah, you must be suffering for some sin that you haven't confessed. And he laid himself bare, and we knew from the picture that we saw in heaven that he hadn't sinned. God himself said that he was the most righteous man on earth, and yet he suffered. So for what did he suffer? And the Jews that believe in this measure for measure, that there has to be this perfect balance, say that therefore his suffering, the suffering of a righteous person, must be paying for some other sins, somebody else's sins. And with that idea in mind, we come to the possibility that Nadab and Abihu suffering, their death, was in some sense a sacrifice for maybe all the people in the golden calf routine or something. But that God sees that the sacrifice of them not as a punishment for their sin, but as a sacrifice that atones for the sins of their generation. Now we can get into a lot of argument about, from a theological standpoint, of how we feel about that, but let's consider the Jewish psyche. that this is presenting to the Jewish mind the possibility that Jesus Christ, the perfect righteous tzedek, could die for the sins of the people. And it prepares a theological background for that being a possibility. The point being that in the New Testament, when the writers of the New Testament are writing about Jesus Christ, the righteous, dying for the sins of the people, this wasn't a new idea out of the blue that would have had the Jews saying, oh, that's outrageous, you can't, Jesus couldn't have died for the sin. They already had that as part of their theological possibilities. It was already in their toolbox as a possibility. Yeah.
It was country western song or something, but the words were, only the good die young. And when I was younger, I was, my gosh, then why do they want to be good if they're going to die young? And that perspective was, but that's what came to mind there. And then the other thing too, we're here on this earth for a certain amount of time. God knows why we're on this earth. And the thought occurred to me with these two gentlemen is that perhaps they had reached that point where God was ready for them.
Yeah.
And so he chose this moment to do that.
Right.
Maybe they had the biggest audience. It wasn't for their purposes, but for God.
Right.
That's what God
Right.
had in mind for
To
that
us,
situation.
to-
And here we are all these centuries later still discussing
You're
it,
right.
but for good. Because we're getting to understand
Yeah.
a little bit better how God works.
And the answer must be someplace in that paradigm, because the sages, for all of their looking around trying to figure out what they did wrong, can't come up with any
This was a God
definitive
thing. It was
answer.
a God thing.
Well, it was for sure a God thing, but was it a God thing that was a punishment? Or was it a God thing that was for some bigger purposes than
It was a bigger purpose.
It was a bigger purpose, I think so.
We still don't know it. We'll know it when we're up there.
Right.
Or down here,
But we
wherever.
can, I get some glimmers that put my spirit to rest, instead of, man, what kind of a mean God is that? I don't have anything to do with him, because you could
God is good.
do just, you could kind of, but yeah, God is good. So why would a good God kill somebody because they accidentally touched something, or because they were disrespectful to their parent, or because they...
But we're thinking like humans.
But we're thinking like humans, exactly. Sherry, you had something?
I look at the strange fire, and then when David was so excited and brought the ark in. Well, first of all, Nadab and Abihu, it was kind of, I look at it as kind of an arrogant act,
For sure,
because
and we're going to get into that.
Oh.
That's coming. We're going to get into that. But before we did, I wanted to just throw out this other possibility.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Then as
But
far
they did wrong. There's
what
no
they
doubt.
chose to do, and
Yeah,
not what God said to do.
right.
And then as far as David and bringing the ark in, number one, David had him put it on a wagon, and that wasn't God's
Prescribed way.
No, it was left at the person's, it was stolen by the Philistines, taken away on a cart, brought back to this one person's house on a cart, and left there on a cart.
And the Philistines didn't get killed.
Right.
No, but
Yeah. But then it was
Yeah, but they
handled
were losing.
They were handling it inappropriately, and they knew
they
the
kept
difference.
knocking God off the wall.
Yeah. Let's not get into Samuel. We'll never get done with Leviticus. Let's move on.
But because he's divine, there's a certain protocol that
Right.
you follow.
That's right.
And we need to understand, because of his divinity, there is a certain way that we handle things, the first thing that is the fear of God, and that's what we're doing. We've got the fear of God if we're doing it in the manner in which he prescribes to us. He is a king.
Right.
We can't look at him as though he's our buddy.
Yeah.
And I don't think the men were Levites that put the ark on the
Okay, like you're in the wrong book. Let's go back to Leviticus.
Okay.
Okay. let that one go, because we can track those trails down and never get back to Leviticus.
Okay.
And that's what you're talking about, right? When they're bringing in the cart.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
back then. But let's get back here. This is going to present us with enough to take care of today. On page 592, let's continue now, because there is no doubt that there was an error here on Nadab and Abihu's point. I'm just suggesting that for them to end up losing their life over it just seems like God must have been doing something more than just disciplining his children. Let's look at the sin of bringing the unbidden. And whose turn is it? Very good. Andrea, please. The sin. Do you see where the bold says the sin of bringing?
The sin of bringing unbidden incense. Most commentators follow Sifra and that Nadab and Abihu he read in bringing their own incense into the Holy of Holies, where even the Kohen Gadol may enter only on Yom Kippur.
Rabbis. Just say rabbis.
Rabbis, okay. And
Both rabbis.
rabbis, however, contend that it is inconceivable that Nadab and Abihu would have taken it upon themselves to enter the holiest part of the sanctuary, something that even their father had not been commanded or authorized to do as yet. Rather, they offered the regular daily incense upon the inner altar, though they had not been commanded to do so.
Very good. Let's have you pick it up, Christine.
Why did Nadab and Abihu take it upon themselves to do so? Seeing the great display of love that God showered upon Israel by sending a heavenly fire to consume the offerings, they wished to reciprocate with the display of their own love to God. They used the incense as their means of doing so, knowing that there was a commandment to bring fire and incense every day, and seeing that Moses had not yet told anyone to do so, they assumed that they should act on their own. Moses, however, was waiting for the descent of the heavenly fire. He wanted the very first incense to be kindled with God's own fire in order to cause a sanctification of God's name.
I like that explanation, that in their zeal, and I think it preaches to all of us, in their zeal, they knew what the plan was, and it hadn't happened yet, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, which they wouldn't have been if they had waited on God. And how often it is possible for us to rush ahead of God to help him get his work done and actually get in the way of what he's trying to do. And I just think it is and you know, we don't ever have from Scripture a condemnation of them. So I don't think that our focus should be on this horrible thing they did wrong. A reminder to all of us not to race ahead of God. But at the same time, he's doing something else here. Yeah, and if he'd already sent this fire, you know, like I said, this lightning bolt is already in its way, and they say, oh, wait, we need to do this too, and step in front of that lightning bolt. It's like, you know, dummies, you should have stayed where you were. Nobody told you to do that. And in fact, they hadn't been told.
Wasn't Becky said it was like an atomic bomb? It kind of was like, you know, isn't that the way she described it?
Well, she might have. I have a little trouble with that because an atomic bomb creates so much collateral damage and so much of the poison that, you know, gets out and everything. The idea of a laser coming down, something that's so controlled,
Direct,
so
more direct.
so defined, right? It came, it hit this, it went to exactly where God wanted it to go. It didn't destroy everything all over the place. But that kind of power, and that probably is what Becky Holland was trying to emphasize, is that the power of this thing was huge. Let's go ahead and look at number 1 down there, Deanne.
The sons of Aaron, they were Aaron's sons, but they slighted him by acting on their own without consulting him. Furthermore, they acted independently without discussing the matter with one another.
And I think that kind of ties in with what you were saying, Sharon, about their arrogance, that they thought that they could act on their own, and that they didn't consult their father, they didn't consult Moses. They just kind of presumed that, well, this must be okay to do. But I still don't think that their death was a punishment for doing that. It just resulted in it. Their death was the result of their acting in those kind of impulses.
Of a chemistry reaction, or what do they call that? Nuclear reaction? It was just
Spontaneous
spontaneous.
combustion.
There you go.
Yeah. And
Because the clothes are still there. It was them that.
that's right, that's what we're gonna look at in just a minute. And I think that idea that their death was the result, but not the punishment of some wrong action on their part. Let's skip a few paragraphs and go down to that Hebrew that says, Achad, which you can't read. I will be honored, very last. Florine?
Okay.
I
I will be honored when God imposes strict justice even upon the righteous. He is feared and honored. People say that if such is the fate of the righteous, surely the punishment of the wicked will be much worse. It is common in human society that powerful or respected people maintain a looser and more permissive standard of behavior than ordinary people. In Judaism, the opposite is true. God demands higher standards from the great ones and deals more strictly with their lapses.
Very good, Deanna.
And Aaron was silent. Aaron had been weeping loudly, but upon hearing Moses' consolation, he stopped, finding comfort in the knowledge that his sons had sanctified God's name. In reward for his son and the acceptance of divine decree, Aaron was honored by having the following mitzvah addressed to him exclusively.
So right there in that part that you just read, there's kind of a hint of something strange going on. He stopped, and he started to wail, and Moses stopped him, and he stopped, finding comfort in the knowledge that his sons had sanctified God's name. So we have in that a hint that their death didn't
Mean nothing.
It didn't mean nothing, and it didn't make God look bad. There's something about their death that sanctified God's name, that made his name more holy. And Moses, and so all of us can imagine as a parent that if we had the misfortune of losing a child at before us, frankly, we could be 80 years old and our 50-year-old kid goes, or 70-year-old kid goes, it's heartbreaking. What do I need? I need 60 years. If I'm 80, a 60-year-old kid, and it still feels heartbreaking. We feel that we need to die before our kids. So at whatever point our kids die is what I'm trying to say. We need the comfort of feeling that their life mattered, that their life accomplished what God wanted their life to accomplish. And apparently Aaron got that consolation.